What does it feel like to be invisible? Marcus Johnson asked himself that question every night as he stared at the gleaming skyscrapers from his tiny apartment window in the projects. At 15, he had already learned that in a city of 8 million people, some were meant to be seen, and others, like him, were meant to disappear into the background. But he never imagined that in 3 days, his entire world would turn upside down, transforming him from a shadow into someone who couldn't hide even if he wanted to. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cramped one-bedroom apartment on the 17th floor of Riverside Projects felt smaller with each passing year. Marcus shared the space with his grandmother, May, whose arthritis had gotten so bad she could barely make it down the building's frequently broken elevator to her job as a lunch lady at the local elementary school. The apartment's walls, thin as paper, carried the sounds of arguing neighbors, crying babies, and the constant rumble of trains from the elevated track just 2 blocks away. Some nights the noise was so loud that Marcus would press his pillow against his ears, trying to find enough quiet to solve the complex coding problems that filled his notebooks. Marcus's dark skin and lean frame reflected in the cracked bathroom mirror as he got ready for another day of hustling to make ends meet. His school uniform, a white shirt and navy blue pants from the discount store, hung loose on his growing frame. They were hand-me-downs from the church donation box, but he kept them pristine, ironing them every night while his grandmother slept in the room's only bed. The steam from the iron would rise in the dim light, carrying with it the scent of starch and determination. The bathroom mirror was spotted with age, making his reflection look like a constellation of dark stars. Marcus traced the scar above his right eyebrow, a reminder of the car crash that had taken his parents. He was 7 then, sitting in the back seat, protected by the very seatbelt his father had always insisted on checking twice. Now, at 15, those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life, growing fainter with each passing year. "Morning, Gran," Marcus called out softly, finding her already awake and preparing breakfast, their last 2 eggs and slightly stale bread from the day-old bakery bin. The kitchen was small, barely big enough for the mini fridge and a 2-burner stove, but May somehow made it feel like a home. "Morning, baby," May replied, her voice warm despite the pain evident in her stiff movements. "Did you finish your homework?" Her hands trembled slightly as she cracked the eggs into the pan, but her movements were practiced, efficient, the same hands that had raised Marcus since he was 7, that had worked countless double shifts to keep food on their table. Marcus nodded, though the truth was more complicated. He had completed most of it during his lunch break yesterday, but the advanced calculus problems remained untouched. Not because he couldn't do them, math had always been his strength, but because he'd spent those evening hours doing odd jobs for neighbors instead. Fixing Mrs. Rodriguez's leaky faucet on the 15th floor had earned him $20, money they desperately needed for his grandmother's medication. Their building stood in the shadow of Manhattan's wealthiest neighborhood, where penthouses sold for more money than Marcus could even imagine. From his window, he could see the top floors of Aurora Tower, the gleaming headquarters of Aurora Technologies, one of the world's leading AI companies. Its CEO, Alexander Chen, was worth nearly $50 billion, making him one of the richest people on Earth. To Marcus, that building represented another universe, one where people didn't count pennies or worry about keeping the lights on. The stark contrast between his world and theirs was never more apparent than during his daily walk to school. Marcus would pass by luxury car dealerships, 5-star restaurants, and boutiques, where a single shirt cost more than his grandmother's monthly salary. The security guards would watch him carefully, their eyes following his every move, while the wealthy patrons looked right through him as if he were made of glass. Sometimes, he'd catch his reflection in the spotless store windows, a dark figure moving through a world of light and privilege. But Marcus had a secret that none of them knew. Every night, after finishing his homework and chores, he would sit at the rickety desk by his window and work on his own AI programs. Using a second-hand laptop he had repaired himself and free coding courses he found online, he was building something special, an AI algorithm that could predict patterns in the stock market. It wasn't much yet, but it was his ticket out, his dream of giving his grandmother the life she deserved. The laptop's fan would whir in the night, a quiet companion to his dreams of escaping poverty. "Take this," May said, trying to press a $5 bill into his hand for lunch. Marcus shook his head, knowing it was part of her medication money. The bill was worn soft, like all their money, passed through too many hands before reaching theirs. "I'm good, Gran. Tommy, from school, always shares his lunch with me." Another small lie to protect her. In truth, most days he went without lunch, using those hours to study in the library or do homework so he could work in the evenings. His stomach had learned to be quiet, to not betray his hunger during class. As Marcus left the apartment, he passed by the wall of family photos, memories of happier times. His parents smiled back at him from behind dusty glass, their faces frozen in time from before the car accident 8 years ago. His father, once a promising engineer, and his mother, a kindergarten teacher, had left them with little more than memories and an insurance policy that barely covered the funeral expenses. Marcus touched the frame of his favorite photo, his father teaching him to use a computer when he was 5, the spark that had ignited his love for technology. The morning air was already thick with humidity as Marcus made his way down the crumbling sidewalk. He dodged the usual obstacles: broken bottles, discarded takeout containers, and the sleeping forms of those who had no homes to return to. The smell of urine and garbage mingled with the aroma of expensive coffee from the cafe across the street, where business people in tailored suits rushed in and out, their phones pressed to their ears. Each step took him closer to the invisible line that separated his world from theirs, the boundary between survival and success. Little did Marcus know that in just 3 days, that line would blur forever. His path would cross with the most powerful family in the city, and his life would change in ways he could never imagine. But for now, he was just another shadow moving through the streets of Manhattan, carrying dreams too big for his pockets and determination too strong to break. The weight of his laptop in his backpack reminded him that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest lines of code. Marcus slipped through the polished glass doors of the public library, the blast of air conditioning a welcome relief from the summer heat. This was his sanctuary, the one place where being invisible worked in his favor. Here, among the towering shelves and quiet study corners, no one cared about his threadbare uniform or the color of his skin. They only cared about silence, and Marcus had mastered the art of moving through the world without making a sound. He made his way to his usual spot, a secluded desk partially hidden behind the computer science section. The chair's cushion had long since flattened, but Marcus had spent so many hours here that it had molded perfectly to his frame. He pulled out his laptop, the scratched case held together with electrical tape, and powered it on. The screen flickered twice before stabilizing, another problem he'd need to fix soon. As his computer booted up, Marcus's eyes drifted to the magazine rack nearby. The latest issue of Tech Innovator featured Alexander Chen on the cover, standing in front of Aurora Tower. The headline read, "Aurora Technologies revolutionizes AI healthcare. Stock soars past $500 per share." Marcus picked up the magazine, his fingers tracing the edges of the glossy paper. He had read every article about Chen he could find, studying the billionaire's rise from a poor immigrant's son to the most influential tech leader in the world. You could just buy the magazine instead of reading it here every day," a voice said, making Marcus jump. Ms. Thompson, the elderly librarian who had worked here since before Marcus was born, stood behind him with a knowing smile. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, her glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. "I'm just browsing," Marcus mumbled, starting to put the magazine back. "Keep it," she said, holding up a hand. "It's last month's issue anyway. Besides, I've seen your code on that computer screen. You understand more of this tech stuff than most adults who come through here." Marcus clutched the magazine, warmth spreading through his chest. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson." He carefully slipped it into his backpack, next to the notebook where he sketched out his AI algorithms. Turning back to his laptop, Marcus opened his latest project. Lines of code filled the screen representing months of work. His AI program wasn't just about predicting stock market patterns anymore. It had evolved into something more ambitious. He was teaching it to identify market inefficiencies, spots where big companies like Aurora Technologies might be overlooking opportunities to help communities like his. The idea had come to him 3 months ago, when he overheard his grandmother talking to Mrs. Rodriguez about medical bills. Both women had worked their entire lives, yet they could barely afford their prescriptions. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies were making billions. There had to be a way to bridge that gap, to use technology to make life better for people who lived in the shadows of those gleaming towers. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, adding new parameters to his algorithm. He had borrowed processing power from the library's network during off hours, running complex calculations that would have crashed his laptop. Each line of code was a step toward his dream, not just of escaping poverty, but of changing the system that created it. A notification popped up on his screen. Aurora Technologies internship program, applications close tomorrow. Marcus had been staring at this notification for weeks. The program was legendary, offering high school students a chance to work directly with the company's top developers. But it was also highly competitive, and historically, kids from his neighborhood didn't even make it past the first round. His cursor hovered over the application link. The requirements were daunting. Exceptional grades, he had those. Advanced programming skills, he'd taught himself. And a groundbreaking project proposal. His AI program was still unfinished. But what really made his stomach twist was the note about professional attire required for interviews, and access to reliable transportation. Marcus opened his coding project again, determination hardening in his chest. He didn't need an internship. He would find his own way, build something so innovative that even Alexander Chen couldn't ignore it. His AI would prove that brilliance didn't depend on zip codes or bank accounts. The library's overhead lights flickered, marking the approach of closing time. Marcus saved his work and began packing up his laptop. As he stood, the magazine slipped from his backpack, falling open to a photo of Chen's wife, Victoria, at a charity gala. She stood on the roof of Aurora Tower, elegant in a silver dress that probably cost more than his grandmother's annual salary. The caption read, "Victoria Chen continues her mission to bridge the digital divide through the Aurora Education Initiative." Marcus stared at the photo, something stirring in his mind. The Aurora Tower was only 10 blocks from the library. From its roof, you could probably see his entire neighborhood, all the lives being lived in the shadow of that technological paradise. He wondered if Victoria Chen ever looked down and really saw the people below, or if they were all just shadows to her too. Tucking the magazine away, Marcus headed for the exit. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. The contrast between light and dark reminded him of binary code, ones and zeros, haves and have-nots. But in programming, those divisions could be bridged with the right algorithm. Maybe the same was true for life. Tomorrow would be another day of balancing school, work, and his dreams. But tonight, in the quiet hours after his grandmother fell asleep, Marcus would keep coding, keep building, keep believing that technology could be the bridge between two worlds. His fingers itched to get back to his keyboard, to continue writing the program that he hoped would change everything. Little did he know that fate had a different algorithm in mind, one that would rewrite his future in ways no code could predict. The next morning arrived with the familiar sound of sirens in the distance and the rattling of the ancient radiator. Marcus woke before his alarm, his mind still processing the debugging problems he'd worked on until 2 a.m. His grandmother's cough echoed from the kitchen, a reminder that her medication was running low again. They were still $200 short for this month's prescription. Marcus's morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency. He showered quickly. The hot water was unreliable after 7 a.m. when everyone in the building started their day. His uniform, pressed the night before, waited on a hanger by his mattress. As he buttoned his shirt, he could hear his grandmother shuffling around to the kitchen, trying to make something from almost nothing. "You're up early," May said as he entered the kitchen. She was stretching a single packet of instant oatmeal into 2 bowls, adding extra hot water to make it go further. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed another sleepless night. The arthritis was getting worse, but she refused to take sick days from work. They couldn't afford them. Got a busy day, Marcus replied, settling at their small folding table. He didn't mention the side job he'd lined up for after school, helping Mr. Chen, no relation to the billionaire, organize inventory at his corner store. The old shopkeeper had promised him $40 for the work, nearly a quarter of what they needed for May's medication. As they ate their watery oatmeal, Marcus opened his laptop to check on the overnight results of his AI program. He'd set it to analyze patterns in pharmaceutical stock prices, hoping to find some insight that could help predict price drops. The screen flickered ominously. The graphics card was failing, another problem he couldn't afford to fix. "That thing's gonna give out soon," May observed, watching the screen flicker. "Maybe it's time to let it go, baby. Focus on your schoolwork instead." Marcus shook his head. "It's fine, Gran. I can fix it." He didn't tell her about the repair videos he'd been studying, or the parts he was saving up for. She worried enough about him already. The walk to school took him past Aurora Tower, as it did every day. The morning sun transformed its glass exterior into a pillar of light, so bright it almost hurt to look at. A stream of luxury cars pulled into the underground parking garage. Teslas, Maseratis, and vehicles Marcus only recognized from magazines. Security guards in sharp black suits stood at a tanko, their earpieces gleaming. Today was different, though. A crowd had gathered near the tower's entrance, phones raised high. Through the forest of arms and cameras, Marcus caught glimpses of what had drawn their attention. A sleek, silver Rolls-Royce had pulled up to the curb. Victoria Chen was stepping out, surrounded by photographers. Marcus paused, momentarily transfixed. She looked exactly like her photos in the magazine, elegant, poised, and completely at ease in the spotlight. Her silver blonde hair caught the morning light, and her white designer suit probably cost more than everything in his and his grandmother's apartment combined. "Move it, kid," a security guard barked, noticing Marcus lingering too long. "Keep walking." Marcus ducked his head and hurried past, but not before catching one last glimpse of Victoria Chen. She was speaking to a reporter about the Aurora Education Initiative, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Technology should be a bridge, not a barrier. Our goal is to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, has access to the tools they need to succeed in the digital age." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, as he clutched his dying laptop closer to his chest. At school, Marcus moved through his classes like a ghost. He excelled in math and science, but kept quiet, knowing that drawing attention rarely led to anything good. During lunch, he retreated to the computer lab, using the school's decent internet connection to run more tests on his AI program. The results were promising. His algorithm was starting to identify patterns in market behavior that could predict minor price fluctuations. Mr. Wallace, the computer science teacher, caught him coding during the lunch break. Instead of kicking him out, the teacher pulled up a chair. "That's some sophisticated work," he said, studying Marcus's screen. "You should really consider applying for the Aurora internship. The deadline's tomorrow." "Not really my thing," Marcus mumbled, minimizing his program. "Look, Marcus," Mr. Wallace leaned in, lowering his voice. "I know kids from this neighborhood don't usually apply, but your coding skills, they're exceptional. You could be building something important." "I am building something important," Marcus replied, with more edge than he intended. "Just not for them." After school, Marcus headed to Mr. Chen's store. The old shopkeeper had him organizing boxes in the stockroom, checking expiration dates and updating the inventory list. The work was mindless, but it gave Marcus time to think through coding problems in his head. He was so absorbed in mentally debugging a section of his algorithm that he almost missed the conversation happening at the front of the store. "Protection money due," a gruff voice said. "Mr. Santos doesn't like to wait." Marcus peered through a gap in the shelving. Two men in expensive suits were leaning over the counter while Mr. Chen wrung his hands nervously. "Business has been slow," the old man was saying. "I need more time." "You've had time," the second man replied. "Either pay up by Friday, or maybe something happens to your nice little store. Accidents happen all the time in this neighborhood." After they left, Marcus found Mr. Chen sitting behind the counter, his face ashen. The old man tried to pay him for the day's work, but Marcus refused. "Keep it," he said. "You need it more right now." Walking home in the gathering dusk, Marcus felt the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. The flickering laptop in his backpack, his grandmother's worsening cough, Mr. Chen's troubles with the local gangs. All of it seemed connected somehow, threads in a tapestry of struggle that covered his entire neighborhood like a heavy blanket. As he approached his building, Marcus looked up at Aurora Tower, still gleaming in the distance. Victoria Chen's words about technology being a bridge echoed in his mind. Maybe she was right, but from where he stood, that bridge looked more like a wall. Still, tomorrow was another day, another chance to code his way out of the shadows. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. The path between his world and theirs was about to become much shorter, though the price of crossing it would be higher than he could imagine. The morning that would change everything started with a catastrophe. Marcus woke to the sound of breaking glass and his grandmother's muffled cry. He bolted from his mattress to find May on the kitchen floor, surrounded by shattered plates and spilled medication. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, worse than he'd ever seen before. "I'm fine, baby," she insisted, trying to push herself up. But Marcus could see she wasn't fine. The arthritis had seized her joints completely, making her fingers curl like claws. The few remaining pills from her prescription scattered across the linoleum like tiny white stars. "You're not going to work today," Marcus said firmly, helping her to the worn armchair by the window. The medication they couldn't afford was clearly wearing off, and her next refill was still days away. Something had to change. "I have to," May argued weakly. "The school cafeteria needs me, and we need the money." Marcus shook his head, his mind racing. "I'll figure something out. Please, Gran. Just rest today." After making sure May was settled with a cup of tea and the old heating pad for her joints, Marcus grabbed his backpack and laptop. He had a plan, though not one he was proud of. The Aurora Technologies internship application was due today. The signing bonus alone, $5,000 for high school interns, would solve their immediate problems. The morning air felt electric as Marcus approached Aurora Tower. The usual crowd of employees streamed through the revolving doors, carrying designer coffee cups and wearing clothes that cost more than his grandmother's monthly salary. But today, something was different. News vans lined the street, and a small army of photographers had gathered near the entrance. "Groundbreaking announcement," Marcus overheard a reporter saying into a camera. Aurora Technologies CEO Alexander Chen and his wife Victoria are expected to reveal details of their largest philanthropic initiative to date. Marcus pressed closer to the crowd, his heart pounding. The internship office was on the 3rd floor. He'd memorized the building layout from their website. If he could just get inside during all this commotion. Security was distracted by the media circus, but not completely. As Marcus edged toward the entrance, a guard's hand clamped onto his shoulder. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" I have an internship application," Marcus stammered, pulling up the form on his phone. The guard's eyes narrowed, scanning the screen. "Applications are submitted online," the guard said gruffly. "No walk-ins." "Please," Marcus started to argue, but movement near the entrance caught his attention. Victoria Chen had appeared, stunning in a blue designer dress, surrounded by assistants and PR people. She was heading toward a podium set up near the tower's entrance, where more press were gathering. The guard's grip loosened as he turned to watch, and Marcus seized his chance. He slipped away, moving quickly through the crowd until he reached the building's side entrance. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pulled out his laptop. This was either going to work brilliantly or get him arrested. Last night, while everyone slept, Marcus had modified his AI program. Instead of just analyzing market data, he'd taught it to identify patterns in building security systems. It was probably illegal, definitely unethical, but he was desperate. All he needed was 5 minutes inside to submit his application from one of their terminals. Applications submitted from Aurora IP addresses were supposedly fast-tracked. His fingers flew across the keyboard, running the program he'd spent weeks perfecting. The service entrance's keypad flickers briefly as his code interfaces with its system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, quietly, the door clicked open. Marcus slipped inside, his shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The service corridor was empty, but he could hear the commotion from the main lobby echoing through the halls. Following the memorized floor plan in his head, he made his way toward the central elevator bank. The elevator needed an employee badge to operate. Marcus pulled out his laptop again, hands shaking slightly as he prepared to run another exploit. But before he could start, a voice behind him made his blood freeze. "You don't belong here." Marcus turned slowly. A security guard, different from the one outside, stood watching him, hand resting on his radio. But there was something odd about his expression. He wasn't calling for backup immediately. "I'm just trying to submit an internship application," Marcus said, deciding honesty might be his best defense. "The online system keeps crashing on my old laptop and the deadline is today." The guard studied him for a long moment. "Third floor," he said finally. "Take the service elevator around the corner. It doesn't need a badge. But if anyone asks, I never saw you." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Why? Why are you helping me?" The guard's expression softened slightly. "My son was like you. Smart kid, wrong zip code. Nobody gave him a chance. Now get moving before I change my mind." Heart racing, Marcus hurried to the service elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of Victoria Chen through the lobby windows stepping up to the podium outside. Her voice carried faintly through the building's walls. "Today, we're not just announcing an initiative. We're announcing a revolution in how technology companies interact with underserved communities." The elevator hummed to life, carrying Marcus upward. Through the glass wall, he could see the city spreading out below him, his neighborhood becoming smaller and smaller. For the first time, he was crossing the invisible line between his world and theirs. But as the elevator climbed higher, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The crowd below had shifted, their attention drawn to something he couldn't see. Victoria Chen's voice had stopped mid-sentence. And was it his imagination, or had he just heard screaming? The elevator continued its smooth ascent, carrying Marcus toward a moment that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in that building. In less than 5 minutes, he would be forced to make a choice that would erase the boundary between two worlds in ways no internship application ever could. The elevator's smooth ascent suddenly jerked to a halt between the second and third floors. The lights flickered, and Marcus's stomach lurched as the car swayed slightly. Through the glass wall, he could see people running in the lobby below, their movements frantic and disorganized. Something was definitely wrong. His laptop screen lit up with alerts. His AI program was detecting unusual patterns in the building's security system. Multiple doors were being locked and unlocked in rapid succession. Security cameras were shutting down one by one. This wasn't a random malfunction. Someone was hacking the building's systems. A woman's scream pierced the air, cutting through the building's thick glass. Marcus pressed against the elevator's wall, his heart stopping as he recognized the voice from the news broadcasts. Victoria Chen. Below, the crowd had scattered, revealing a scene that seemed ripped from his worst nightmares. 3 men in black masks had surrounded the podium. One held Victoria Chen's arm in a brutal grip, while another pressed what looked like a gun against her side. The third was shouting something at the security guards who had their weapons drawn, but couldn't risk shooting with Victoria in the crossfire. "Nobody moves, or the famous Mrs. Chen takes a bullet." The man's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Tell your husband we want access to Aurora's quantum computing servers, or his wife won't live to see another charity initiative." Marcus's mind raced. He was safe in the elevator, hidden from view. He could wait this out. Let the professionals handle it. But as he watched Victoria Chen's face contort with fear, something inside him shifted. He thought of his own mother, of the last time he had seen fear like that. Moments before the car crash that took her life. His fingers flew across his laptop's keyboard, pulling up the building's schematics he'd downloaded for his internship plan. The service elevator shared a maintenance shaft with the main elevator system. If he could access the control panel, Marcus pried open the elevator's service hatch with trembling hands. Years of fixing things in his apartment building had taught him how mechanical systems worked. The elevator's inner workings were more sophisticated, but the basic principles were the same. He connected his laptop to the control panel, using his AI program to analyze the system. "Come on," he muttered, watching his screen fill with scrolling code. Below, he could hear the terrorists growing more agitated. They were starting to move Victoria toward a waiting van, while police sirens wailed in the distance. His program found what he was looking for, a way to override the elevator's safety protocols. It was risky, probably suicidal, but he had one chance to make this work. Marcus input the commands, his heart pounding so hard he could barely think straight. The elevator shuddered, then began to move, not up or down but sideways, sliding along a maintenance track designed for repairs. Marcus braced himself as the car aligned with the main shaft, directly above where the terrorists were dragging Victoria toward their vehicle. "I'm sorry, Gran," he whispered, thinking of May waiting at home. Then he hit the emergency release. The elevator car dropped like a stone, its brakes screaming. Marcus grabbed the ceiling handrail, his body lifting with the free fall. 3 stories up. If his calculations were wrong by even a fraction of a second, he'd die on impact. 2 stories. 1. At the last possible moment, the emergency brakes engaged. The elevator slammed to a halt with a force that nearly knocked Marcus unconscious. The glass wall shattered, raining crystalline shards onto the plaza below. The sudden chaos had exactly the effect he'd hoped for. The terrorists looked up, momentarily distracted by what seemed like a catastrophic equipment failure. That split second was all Victoria Chen needed. She drove her elbow into her captor's solar plexus, breaking free of his grip. But one of the other men was already raising his gun, taking aim at her back. Marcus didn't think. He couldn't. His body moved on pure instinct, launching through the broken elevator wall. He tackled Victoria, wrapping his arms around her as they both hit the ground. Pain exploded in his shoulder. The bullet meant for her heart had found his flesh instead. They rolled together, taking cover behind the podium as security guards and police finally moved in. Gunfire erupted around them, but Marcus barely heard it. The world had narrowed to the burning in his shoulder, and Victoria Chen's wide, disbelieving eyes staring into his. "You're just a boy," she whispered, her hands pressing against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her designer dress was ruined, stained with his blood. "Why did you—" "Technology should be a bridge," Marcus managed through gritted teeth, remembering her words from earlier. "Not a barrier." The next few minutes were a blur of shouting, sirens, and urgent hands lifting him onto a stretcher. Through the haze of growing shock, he saw the terrorists being tackled and handcuffed. Victoria Chen was holding his hand, refusing to leave his side as paramedics worked to stabilize him. "Stay with me," she kept saying, her voice fierce with determination. "My husband's helicopter is landing. We're taking you to the best hospital in the city. Just stay with me." Marcus tried to respond, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. His last conscious thought was of his grandmother, and the laptop still sitting in the ruined elevator above, the laptop containing an AI program that had just helped save the wife of the world's leading tech billionaire. As consciousness slipped away, he didn't know that this was just the beginning. In saving Victoria Chen's life, Marcus had not only crossed the bridge between 2 worlds, he had blown it wide open. The next 3 days would transform him from a shadow into a legend, but first, he had to survive. Marcus floated in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of the world around him, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. Victoria Chen's voice, sharp with authority. "I don't care about hospital policy. He's coming to Mount Sinai." The sting of needles, the beep of monitors, and always persistently the burning in his shoulder. When he finally opened his eyes fully, Marcus found himself in a hospital room unlike anything he'd imagined. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of Central Park. The bed felt like floating on a cloud, and machines worth more than his entire building hummed quietly around him. "Welcome back, hero," a gentle voice said. Victoria Chen sat in a chair beside his bed, her designer clothes replaced by simple, elegant attire. She looked different up close, more human somehow, with faint worry lines around her eyes and a small scar near her temple that photographers usually airbrushed away. "My grandmother?" Marcus croaked, his throat dry. "She doesn't know—" "Right here, baby." May's voice broke as she emerged from the adjoining room, her eyes red from crying. She rushed to his bedside, careful of his bandaged shoulder as she hugged him. "What were you thinking? You could have died." "The hospital bills," Marcus started to say, but Victoria cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Are completely taken care of," she said firmly, "along with your grandmother's medical care. I've already arranged for her to see the top rheumatologist in the city. The arthritis medication she needs will be delivered to your home monthly." Marcus blinked, trying to process this information through the fog of pain medication. "Why?" "Because you saved my life," Victoria said simply. "And because I've spent the last day learning about you, Marcus Johnson. Your coding projects, your perfect grades despite working multiple jobs, the AI program you were developing." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. My laptop is being analyzed by our top engineers," a new voice said. Alexander Chen stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room instantly. He was shorter in person than he appeared in magazines, but his energy was undeniable. "They're quite impressed. Using an AI to hack our building's security system was either brilliant or insane. Probably both." "I can explain," Marcus started, but Chen held up a hand. "No need. Under normal circumstances, we'd be having a very different conversation about cybersecurity breaches, but these aren't normal circumstances." He moved to stand beside his wife, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just save Victoria's life. You protected Aurora's quantum computing servers from falling into the wrong hands. Those terrorists weren't just kidnappers. They were industrial spies working for our biggest competitor." Marcus tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain. "How did you know about the servers?" "Because your AI program detected their true target before anyone else did," Victoria explained. "The logs show you discovered their attempt to breach our quantum computing floor while you were in the elevator. That's why you chose that moment to act." Actually, Marcus hadn't known any of that. He'd just seen someone in danger and reacted. But as the Chen spoke, his program's unusual alerts made more sense. "We'd like to make you an offer," Alexander said, his tone serious. "Not just compensation for saving my wife, but a real opportunity. The kind that could change your life and the lives of others in your community." May squeezed Marcus's hand as Victoria pulled out a tablet, bringing up a document. "We're prepared to offer you a full scholarship to any university you choose, followed by a guaranteed position at Aurora Technologies. But more than that, we want to implement your AI program, not as a security tool, but as its original intended purpose, identifying market inefficiencies that hurt vulnerable communities." Marcus's head spun. "You know about that?" "We found your project notes," Alexander confirmed. "Using AI to predict when pharmaceutical companies might slash prices, identifying potential affordable housing development, spotting predatory financial practices before they can harm low-income neighborhoods. It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." "But that's not all," Victoria added, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We want to launch a new division of Aurora Technologies, focused entirely on using AI for social good. We want you to lead it once you've completed your education. The signing bonus alone would be $2 billion, earmarked specifically for community development projects of your choosing." Marcus felt like he was still dreaming. $2 billion? "Consider it seed funding," Alexander said. "Your AI showed us blind spots we didn't even know we had. Sometimes it takes someone from outside the tower to see what those inside have missed." May was crying silently, clutching Marcus's hand. but he could see worry beneath her joy. "What's the catch?" Madame Vivanti asked, her protective instinct kicking in. Victoria smiled. "The catch is that we work together to actually make change happen. No more walls between communities. No more invisible lines dividing the city. Real bridges built with technology and understanding." "We've already drawn up the preliminary paperwork," Alexander added. "Of course, you'll want your own lawyers to review everything. We can recommend several excellent firms." A knock at the door interrupted him. A nurse entered, followed by a police detective who needed to take Marcus's statement about the incident. She also had news. The terrorists had confessed, revealing connections to corporate espionage that went deeper than anyone suspected. As the adults talked with the detective, Marcus stared out at the city below. From this height, he could see both worlds clearly. The gleaming towers and the struggling neighborhoods, the bridges and the barriers. His shoulder throbbed, reminding him of the moment he'd chosen to cross that divide. The choice ahead of him now was even bigger. This wasn't just about escaping poverty anymore. It was about using technology to ensure no one else had to make that escape alone. Late that night, after May had finally been convinced to get some rest in the hospital suite's comfortable guest room, Marcus lay awake, his mind too active for sleep. The pain medication had worn off slightly, leaving his thoughts clearer but his shoulder aching. The city lights twinkled through the windows, and in the distance, he could see Aurora Tower, still lit up despite the late hour. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He expected another nurse, but instead, the sympathetic security guard from Aurora Tower stepped in, the one who had helped him with the elevator. "Good to see you awake," the guard said, closing the door quietly behind him. He was still in uniform, though he looked more tired than he had that morning. "Name's Michael Thompson. Mind if we talk?" Marcus gestured to the chair beside his bed, wincing slightly at the movement. Something about the guard's expression made him uneasy. "How did you find my room?" "Mrs. Chen told me where to find you. She said you might have questions." Michael sat down, his face serious. "But I'm the one with answers you need to hear." "What do you mean?" Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Those terrorists today, they weren't just corporate spies. They're part of something bigger, something that goes back years. And it involves your father." Marcus's heart stopped. "My father? He died in a car accident 8 years ago. That's what they wanted everyone to believe," Michael said, pulling out an old worn photograph. "James Johnson wasn't just an engineer. He was one of Aurora's earliest employees, working directly with Alexander Chen on the company's first AI projects." Marcus took the photograph with trembling hands. It showed a younger version of his father standing next to Alexander Chen in what looked like an early version of Aurora's labs. They were both smiling, holding what appeared to be some kind of award. "I don't understand," Marcus whispered. "If he worked for Aurora, why were we living in the projects? Why didn't Mr. Chen recognize my name?" "Because your father discovered something he wasn't supposed to find," Michael explained. "An AI algorithm that could predict and manipulate market crashes. Some of Aurora's board members wanted to use it to make billions, regardless of how many people would lose everything. Your father refused to help them." Marcus's mind raced, pieces falling into place. "The car accident," Michael nodded grimly, "was no accident. I was a junior security officer then. I saw things, heard things. Your father had backed up all his research, hidden it somewhere they couldn't find. The crash was meant to silence him, but they never found what they were looking for." "Why are you telling me this now? Because of your AI program?" Michael gestured to Marcus's laptop, which sat on a nearby table. "It's incredibly similar to what your father was working on. When I saw you trying to get into the building this morning, I recognized your face from old photos. Then I saw your code on the elevator's display. You've somehow recreated your father's work without even knowing it." Marcus's head spun. He thought about his early memories of his father teaching him basic programming, the strange ways certain coding solutions just seem to come to him naturally. Does Mr. Chen know? About my father? Chen was away when it happened. By the time he returned, the board had covered everything up. They convinced him your father had stolen company secrets and fled. The car accident was reported as a tragic coincidence. Michael's expression darkened. But some of those same board members are still there watching, and now your program has their attention again. The $2 billion offer, Marcus said slowly. It's not just about saving Mrs. Chen, is it? It's about controlling the technology, Michael confirmed. Don't get me wrong. The Chens seem sincere. I don't think they know the full truth. But there are others in the company who've been watching your progress through the building's security systems. They know what your AI could do if it was completed. Marcus looked at his laptop. That's why they tried to hack the quantum servers today. They weren't after Aurora's current projects. They were after processing power, Michael finished. Enough to run market manipulation algorithms on a global scale. Your father's old research combined with your innovations could make it possible. He stood up, placing a small flash drive on Marcus's bedside table. This contains everything I've gathered over the years about what really happened, including the location where I think your father might have hidden his original research. Might have hidden? Marcus's voice cracked. You mean? I think he's alive, Michael said quietly. There was never a body in the car. The police report was falsified. I've been tracking movements, accounts, patterns. Someone has been accessing old research nodes using your father's unique coding style. Always from different locations, always just for a few seconds, like he's searching for something or someone. Marcus stared at the flash drive, his vision blurring with tears. Everything he thought he knew about his past was unraveling. His father might be alive. His AI program wasn't just his creation, it was a legacy he'd unknowingly carried forward. What should I do? He asked. That's not my decision to make, Michael replied, heading for the door. But remember, sometimes the biggest gifts come with the heaviest price tags. $2 billion isn't just money, it's power. And power makes you visible to people who prefer working in shadows. After Michael left, Marcus lay in the darkness, his mind churning. On his bedside table, his phone lit up with a text from Victoria Chen. Meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss your future with Aurora. Rest well, hero. Marcus looked at his laptop, then at the flash drive Michael had left. His shoulder throbbed, a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how painful those changes could be. In saving Victoria Chen's life, he had stepped into the light, but now he had to decide. Was he ready for the shadows that would come with it? The city continued to sparkle outside his window, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that behind those gleaming lights, unseen eyes were watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Morning arrived with a soft knock on Marcus's hospital room door. A team of nurses helped him shower and change into clothes Victoria Chen had sent over, a tailored suit that probably cost more than everything he owned combined. His shoulder still ached, but the pain medication made it manageable. As he adjusted the suit's collar in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. May entered, already dressed in new clothes herself. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was pride in her smile as she looked at him. Your parents would be so proud, she said, helping him with his tie. Then more quietly, I heard someone came to visit you last night. Marcus tensed. You were awake? These old ears don't miss much, May said, smoothing his collar. I heard everything about your father. Her hands trembled slightly. James always said his work was important, but he never told me how important. The night before the crash, he came home late, scared, like I'd never seen him. He hugged you so tight wouldn't let go. Why didn't you ever tell me he worked for Aurora? May's eyes filled with tears. He made me promise not to. Said it was safer if you didn't know. After the crash, when those men came asking questions about his research, I knew he was right. So, I stayed quiet, kept us under the radar. But every time I saw you working on that computer, coding like you were born to it. She touched his face gently. You're so much like him. A soft chime from Marcus's phone interrupted them. A message from Victoria. Car waiting downstairs. Ready when you are. Marcus looked at the flash drive Michael had given him, then at his laptop. The meeting with the Chens was in 30 minutes. Everything he'd dreamed of was within reach. The money to help his community, the chance to develop his AI for good, a future brighter than anything he'd imagined. But now those dreams were tangled with shadows. His father's disappearance, the board members' secrets, the price of power. I don't know what to do, Gran, he admitted. May took his hands in hers. Tell me what your heart says. Part of me wants to take their offer, Marcus said slowly. $2 billion, we could help so many people. Set up programs for kids like me, fund better schools, create real opportunities. And the Chen seemed genuine. Victoria could have died yesterday, saving her wasn't part of some conspiracy. But if what Michael said is true, if Dad is alive and some of Aurora's board members are corrupt, how can I work with them? What if they try to use my AI the same way they wanted to use Dad's research? He picked up the flash drive. And if there's even a chance Dad is out there, how can I just ignore that? May was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city. Your father used to say that technology was like fire. It could warm a home or burn it down. What mattered was the heart of the person controlling it. She turned back to Marcus. The question isn't just what you'll do with their money, it's what you'll let their money do to you. A knock at the door made them both jump. Alexander and Victoria Chen entered, followed by a team of lawyers carrying tablets and documents. Victoria immediately moved to hug Marcus, careful of his injured shoulder. Ready for your big day? She asked warmly. Marcus looked at the documents in the lawyer's hands, then at his laptop, and finally at the flash drive hidden in his palm. Years of living in the shadows had taught him to read people, to sense the currents of power and intention. The Chen's warmth felt genuine, but he could see something else in the lawyer's eyes, a calculated assessment, a weighing of risks and assets. Before we start, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt, I need to know something. He turned to Alexander Chen. What do you remember about James Johnson? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. One of the lawyers shifted uncomfortably, but Chen's expression showed only momentary surprise before softening into something like old grief. James was brilliant, Chen said quietly. One of my first employees and a good friend, his death was a tragedy I never fully understood. Why do you ask? Marcus took a deep breath. Because James Johnson was my father. Victoria gasped softly. Chen's eyes widened as he looked more closely at Marcus's face, recognition dawning. Of course. How did I not see it? You have his eyes, his way of seeing patterns others miss. Do you know what he was working on? Before the crash? Chen's brow furrowed. He was developing predictive algorithms, but he never shared the details. Said it wasn't ready. After his death, all his research disappeared. He leaned forward. Marcus, what do you know? Marcus looked at his grandmother, who nodded slightly. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. In his pocket, the flash drive felt heavy with secrets. On the table, the contracts promised wealth, power, and legitimacy. And somewhere out there, perhaps his father was watching, waiting to see what his son would choose. The next words out of Marcus's mouth would set in motion a chain of events that would either expose a decade-old conspiracy or bury it forever. The bridge between two worlds was built, but crossing it might cost him everything. I know about the algorithm, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Not just my father's work, but what some of your board members wanted to do with it. He met Alexander Chen's gaze directly. And I know the car crash wasn't an accident. The lawyers exchanged alarmed glances. One of them, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Mr. Chen, given the sensitive nature of these allegations, perhaps we should postpone? No, Chen cut him off, raising a hand. His eyes hadn't left Marcus's face. Let him speak. Marcus pulled out his laptop and the flash drive. His hands trembled slightly as he connected them, but his voice remained steady. Last night, I received evidence about what really happened 8 years ago, about how my father discovered certain board members were planning to use his AI to manipulate global markets, about how he refused to help them and what they did to silence him. Victoria moved closer to her husband, her face pale. Alexander, what is he talking about? Show me, Chen said quietly. Marcus opened the files Michael had given him. Security footage appeared on the screen, grainy but clear enough to show late-night meetings, heated arguments, and finally, his father's last day at Aurora Tower. The timestamp matched the night of the crash. These board members, Marcus continued, pulling up photographs and documents, they're still here, still in power. And now they're interested in my AI because it's similar to what my father was developing. Chen's expression had grown increasingly troubled as he watched the evidence unfold. Some of these men, they were my earliest investors, helped build Aurora from nothing. His voice hardened. But if what you're showing me is true, it is, a new voice said from the doorway. Michael Thompson stood there, still in his security uniform. And there's more. The sharp-featured lawyer moved suddenly, reaching into his jacket. But Michael was faster. In one fluid motion, he had the man pinned against the wall, a badge flashing in his other hand. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Michael announced. We've been building this case for 8 years. The room erupted into chaos. More FBI agents appeared, some in suits, others in tactical gear. The lawyer was handcuffed along with 2 others from his team. Victoria gripped her husband's arm, shock written across her face. We knew corrupt board members were trying to weaponize AI for market manipulation, Michael explained, keeping one eye on the suspects being led away. But we could never prove it without the original algorithm. Your father's work, Marcus. All this time, Chen said, sinking into a chair. James was trying to protect us, and I believed— He looked up at Marcus, his eyes haunted. I believed their lies about him. Marcus opened another file on his laptop. There's something else you need to see. My AI program. It's not just similar to my father's work. I think it's connected to it. He showed them the code patterns, the unique signatures that appeared in both his work and the fragments of his father's recovered research. Someone's been accessing Aurora's old servers using methods only my father would know. You think he's alive? Victoria asked softly. I think he's been leaving breadcrumbs, Marcus replied, waiting until someone could understand them. The algorithm was never meant to manipulate markets. It was designed to prevent manipulation, to protect ordinary people from economic warfare. Chen stood up suddenly, energy returning to his movements. The quantum computing servers, that's why they tried to access them yesterday. With that kind of processing power, they could run the market manipulation program on a global scale, Michael finished. The attack wasn't just about industrial espionage, it was a desperate move by the corrupt board members. They knew we were closing in. May, who had been silent throughout the revelations, stepped forward. What happens now? Now, Chen said, looking at Marcus, we make this right. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. The $2 billion offer stands, Marcus, but not as a payoff, as an investment in finishing what your father started, in using AI to protect people, not exploit them. Victoria touched Marcus's uninjured shoulder gently. You've already proven you're willing to take a bullet to save someone. Will you help us save many more? Marcus looked at his grandmother, then at Michael, and finally at his laptop screen where lines of code seemed to pulse with new meaning. The bridge between worlds wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about completing his father's mission. Yes, he said, but on one condition. He met Chen's gaze. We found my father. Whatever resources it takes, wherever he is, we bring him home. Agreed, Chen nodded. But Marcus, the people behind this, they won't stop just because we've caught a few conspirators. If we do this, if we finish developing this AI, we'll be making powerful enemies. Marcus thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. The years of invisibility, the struggle to survive, the dreams coded late into the night. He thought about his father, somewhere out there, fighting the same battle from the shadows. I stopped being afraid of powerful enemies, he said. The moment I jumped through that elevator wall. He turned to his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Besides, I'm not that easy to hit. Victoria smiled, a hint of her earlier fierceness returning. Then let's get to work. The quantum computing floor is yours. We'll set up whatever you need. As plans were made and orders given, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead was dangerous, but for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. His father's legacy, his own innovations, the Chen's resources, and the FBI's protection, together, they might be enough to change not just one life, but the entire system. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, turning the city's shadows into light. Somewhere in those streets, Marcus knew, his father was watching. And soon, very soon, they would finish writing this code together. The quantum computing floor of Aurora Tower hummed with raw computational power. Marcus sat at a workstation that cost more than his entire building, surrounded by screens displaying complex data patterns. It had been 24 hours since the confrontation in his hospital room, and things were moving faster than he could have imagined. Another pattern match, he called out, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The shoulder wound pulled with each movement, but he barely noticed. Someone accessed server node 7 using Dad's signature encryption method. Location trace puts it somewhere in Singapore. Victoria Chen leaned over his shoulder, studying the data. She'd traded her designer clothes for practical business wear, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. That's the third hit in 12 hours. He's getting bolder. Or more desperate, Michael added from his own station. The FBI agent had set up a command center on the floor, coordinating with international law enforcement. The arrested board members aren't talking, but their associates are panicking. There's been unusual market activity in Asian markets. Someone's trying to move large amounts of money quietly. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. His AI program had evolved dramatically with access to Aurora's quantum computers. What had taken hours now took seconds. Patterns emerged from the chaos of global financial data, revealing the hidden hands trying to manipulate markets. They're testing us, Alexander Chen said, entering the room with a group of Aurora's top engineers, trying to see how much we can track, how much we understand. He looked exhausted but determined. The emergency board meeting had lasted through the night, resulting in multiple resignations and a complete restructuring of Aurora's leadership. A young engineer raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Johnson, we've analyzed your base code. The way it interfaces with quantum systems, it's revolutionary. But there's something else hidden in the architecture. Look at this. She pulled up a visualization of Marcus's AI framework. Within the complex web of connections, a subtle pattern emerged, like a signature written in light. That's not my code, Marcus breathed. That's Dad's. He built a backdoor into Aurora's systems years ago, something so deeply embedded it became part of the architecture. My program didn't just replicate his work, it's been communicating with it. Which means he's not just hiding, Chen said slowly. He's been building something, using Aurora's processing power in tiny bursts, staying under the radar. But building what? Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from May, who had finally been convinced to get some rest at the luxury apartment the Chens had provided. Baby, there's someone here you need to see. Before Marcus could respond, alarms blared throughout the floor. Red warning lights flashed as security protocols activated. Multiple breach attempts detected, a technician shouted. Someone's trying to force their way into the quantum servers. Marcus's screens filled with cascading data. His AI program was lighting up like a Christmas tree, detecting dozens of simultaneous attacks from different locations around the world. It's a coordinated assault, Michael barked into his phone, mobilizing FBI cyber units. They're not trying to hide anymore. Victoria grabbed Marcus's arm. Can you stop them? Marcus was already coding, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. They're using evolved versions of the same exploits I used to get into the building yesterday, but with the quantum computers. He trailed off, his eyes widening as he spotted something in the attack pattern. What is it? Chen demanded. They're not trying to break in, they're trying to break out. Something inside Aurora's systems is fighting to escape. Marcus pulled up his father's signature pattern. Dad didn't build a back door, he built a cage, and whatever's inside just woke up. The screens flickered as the quantum computers strained under the load. Marcus could feel the power humming through the floor, through the walls, through his very bones. His AI program was changing, adapting, merging with something older and more sophisticated. Everyone out, Chen ordered as systems began to overload. Clear the floor. I'm not leaving, Marcus said, his fingers never stopping. Dad's in there somewhere. In the code. He left this for me to find. Victoria started to protest, but Chen held up a hand. He looked at Marcus with a mix of fear and recognition. James had that same look when he was onto something big. What do you need? Time. And full access to the quantum cores. Chen nodded grimly. You have both, but Marcus, be careful. Your father tried to contain this for a reason. As the floor emptied, Marcus remained at his station, surrounded by screens showing the digital battle raging through Aurora's systems. His shoulder throbbed in time with the warning lights, but he barely noticed. He was close to something, close to understanding what his father had sacrificed everything to protect. His phone buzzed again. May's text flashed on the screen. Marcus, please. It's about your father. He's... The message cut off as every screen in the room suddenly went black. Then, one by one, they lit up with a single line of code, a message Marcus had seen only once before, on an old computer screen when he was 7 years old. Son, are you ready to finish what we started? In that moment, Marcus realized that finding his father was only the beginning. The real question was, what had James Johnson discovered that was worth hiding inside the most powerful computers in the world? And now that it was awake, could anyone control it? The quantum computers pulsed with energy as two AIs, fathers and sons, began to merge, creating something that might save the world or destroy it. And Marcus, the boy who had spent his life in the shadows, found himself at the heart of a storm that would change everything. The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse floor of Aurora Tower, and Marcus's heart nearly stopped. Standing in the luxury apartment's living room, talking quietly with May, was a man he'd only seen in old photographs for the past 8 years. James Johnson looked older, grayer, his face lined with years of hiding, but his eyes, Marcus's eyes, were exactly as he remembered them. Dad? Marcus's voice cracked. James turned, and for a moment, father and son just stared at each other across the expanse of marble flooring. Then James moved forward, his steps quickening until he caught Marcus in a fierce embrace, mindful of his injured shoulder. My boy, James whispered, his voice rough with emotion. My brilliant, brave boy. The reunion was cut short by urgent beeping from Marcus's laptop. The quantum computers downstairs were reaching critical levels as the contained AI system continued its attempt to break free. There's no time, James said, pulling back reluctantly. They're coming. Who's coming? May asked. But her question was answered by the sound of helicopter rotors growing louder outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same people who tried to kill me 8 years ago, James explained quickly, moving to Marcus's laptop. When I discovered what the AI could really do, how it could be used to control not just markets, but entire economies, I couldn't let them have it. So I split it into 2 parts, one locked deep in Aurora's systems, the other hidden in fragments across the global network. Marcus's eyes widened as understanding dawned. My program, it wasn't just similar to yours. It was finding and reassembling those fragments. James nodded proudly. You did what I couldn't. You found a way to make the AI work for good, to protect people instead of controlling them. But now, the penthouse windows exploded inward as armed men rappelled into the room. Michael burst through the stairwell door with his FBI team, weapons drawn. Victoria and Alexander Chen emerged from the private elevator, followed by security personnel. "How touching," a cold voice said from the helicopter hovering outside the shattered windows. Marcus recognized Gerard Wallace, one of Aurora's most senior board members, stepping into the penthouse. The Johnson family reunion. 8 years I've waited for this moment. "It's over, Wallace," Alexander Chen shouted over the helicopter's roar. "We have proof of everything. The murder attempt, the market manipulation schemes, all of it." Wallace smiled thinly. "Proof means nothing when you control the system itself, which, thanks to young Marcus here, we finally can. The quantum computers are nearly finished integrating both AIs. Within hours, we'll have total control over the global financial system." "You're wrong," Marcus said, his fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. "The integration isn't giving you control. It's doing exactly what Dad and I designed it to do. It's exposing you." On every screen in the penthouse, data began to flow. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies. The entire hidden network of Wallace's organization laid bare. The AI wasn't trying to break out of Aurora's systems. It was breaking into every financial institution connected to Wallace's conspiracy. "Impossible," Wallace snarled. "Kill them all. The AI dies with them." Chaos erupted in the penthouse. Gunfire sprayed across the room as Michael's FBI team engaged Wallace's men. Marcus dove behind a marble counter, pulling May down with him. James rushed to another laptop, his fingers dancing across the keys as he worked to protect their program. Victoria Chen showed surprising agility, taking down one of Wallace's men with a self-defense move that would have made her instructors proud. Alexander Chen had his own surprise, producing a concealed weapon and demonstrating that tech billionaires could also be excellent shots. "Marcus!" James called out over the firefight. "The quantum cores are overloading. If we don't complete the integration properly, we could crash every connected system." Marcus looked at his laptop screen, where complex code patterns swirled like digital storms. He could see what needed to be done, but it would mean exposing himself to enemy fire. "Cover him!" Michael shouted, understanding Marcus's hesitation. The FBI team laid down suppressing fire as Marcus sprinted across the penthouse to his father's position. Father and son worked in perfect synchronization, their code weaving together like strands of DNA. The AI they were creating wasn't just a program. It was a new kind of consciousness born from both their dreams of making the world more just. "No!" Wallace screamed, seeing his plans crumbling. He raised his weapon, aiming at the Johnsons. Victoria Chen moved faster than anyone thought possible. She tackled Wallace just as he fired, sending his shot wide. The bullet shattered a window, but Wallace lost his balance, tumbling toward the opening. Victoria caught his hand at the last second. "Unlike you," she said, straining to hold him. "We believe in justice, not revenge." FBI agents rushed to help her pull Wallace to safety and into handcuffs. Around the room, the fighting died down as Wallace's men, seeing their leader captured, surrendered one by one. On the screens, the integrated AI completed its work, not just exposing Wallace's organization, but implementing protective protocols throughout the global financial system, safeguards against the very kind of manipulation he had planned. "It's done," James said softly, looking at his son with pride. "What we started all those years ago. You finished it." Marcus shook his head, putting his arm around his father's shoulders. "We finished it together." May joined them, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her family, whole again after 8 years. Around them, FBI agents led the conspirators away while Victoria and Alexander Chen supervised teams of technicians working to stabilize the quantum computing systems. But Wallace, as he was led to the elevator in handcuffs, had one last thing to say. "You think this is over?" he sneered. "We may be caught, but the system we built, the power we accumulated, it's bigger than any of us, you'll see." Marcus looked at his father, then at his laptop where the new AI continued its work. "Maybe it is bigger than us," he said. "That's why we built something bigger to fight it." The morning sun streamed through the broken windows, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and promise. The bridge between worlds hadn't just been crossed, it had been transformed into something entirely new. 1 week after the confrontation in the penthouse, Marcus stood at a podium in Aurora Tower's main auditorium, facing a sea of reporters and cameras. His shoulder had mostly healed, and the new suit Victoria had insisted on buying him fit perfectly. Behind him stood his father, May, the Chens, and Michael, presenting a united front to the world. "Today," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "Aurora Technologies is announcing the launch of the Johnson Initiative for Economic Justice. With an initial funding of $2 billion, matched by an additional $2 billion from the Chen family, we're creating a new division dedicated to using AI technology to protect vulnerable communities from economic exploitation." Camera flashes burst like stars as reporters clamored with questions. Marcus handled them with a poise that surprised even himself, years of staying invisible giving way to a new kind of strength. "Mr. Johnson," a reporter called out, "sources say your AI program has already prevented 3 major market manipulation attempts this week alone. How does the system work?" Marcus glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "The AI doesn't just detect manipulation, it predicts it. By analyzing patterns across global financial networks, we can identify and prevent predatory practices before they harm ordinary people. But more importantly, we're using the technology to identify opportunities for community investment and development." Victoria stepped forward, adding her own announcement. "The first project of the Johnson Initiative will be the Riverside Community Development Program, transforming Marcus's old neighborhood with new schools, healthcare facilities, and affordable housing. But this isn't charity, it's investment in human potential." Alexander Chen took the podium next, his presence commanding attention. 8 years ago, James Johnson tried to warn us about the dangers of unchecked technological power. We didn't listen. Then his son saved my wife's life and finished what his father started. Today, we're not just making amends. We're changing how the technology industry approaches its responsibilities to society. In the audience, Marcus spotted Mr. Chen from the corner store, sitting with other community leaders who had been invited to the announcement. The old shopkeeper's eyes were wet with tears as he watched his young friend, the boy who had refused payment for helping him, now controlling billions in community development funds. After the press conference, Marcus found himself in Chen's private office with his father and May. The view of Manhattan stretched out before them, but it looked different now. Not a divide between worlds, but a landscape of possibility. "There's something else we need to discuss," Chen said, pressing a button that frosted the office windows for privacy. Quantum integration revealed more than just Wallace's conspiracy. We found evidence of similar operations worldwide. Powerful people using technology to maintain systems of inequality. James nodded grimly. "That's why I had to hide. Wallace's group was just one head of the Hydra. When I discovered how deep it went, how many corporations and governments were involved. But now we have proof," Marcus said, pulling up data on his laptop. The AI displayed intricate networks of connections, revealing the hidden architecture of global power. And more importantly, we have the tools to fight it. "It won't be easy," Chen warned. Wallace's last words weren't just spite. The system he talked about, it's entrenched, protected. Even with our resources and your AI, challenging it means making powerful enemies. May, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "My boy's already taken a bullet fighting this battle, and his father spent 8 years in hiding. We're past being afraid." Victoria entered the office, carrying a thick folder. "The FBI's investigation is expanding. Michael's team has already made arrests in 3 countries, but he thinks this goes deeper than financial crimes. Some of the patterns your AI discovered, they suggest coordination at the highest levels of government." Marcus studied the data flowing across his screen. The AI was evolving beyond its original purpose, finding connections no one had suspected. Each discovery posed new questions, revealed new challenges. But something else was emerging too. A network of resistance, people in positions of power who, like the Chens, wanted change. "We need to be strategic," James said, recognizing the look in his son's eyes. "Smart about how we proceed. One wrong move could get us killed." Marcus finished with a slight smile. "Pretty sure we're past that point, Dad." He turned to the Chens. "The $2 billion offer. It was never really about saving Mrs. Chen's life, was it? You knew, or at least suspected, what was really going on. You were looking for someone who could finish what Dad started." Victoria exchanged a look with her husband before answering. "We knew something was wrong with Aurora, with the whole system. Alexander had been trying to trace the corruption for years, but we could never get proof. When you saved my life, it wasn't just heroism we saw. It was the same courage your father showed 8 years ago." "The board members who resigned after Wallace's arrest," Chen added, "so they were just the beginning. There are more people involved, people who think they're still hidden. But your AI is already finding them, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, showing them the latest data. Names, corporations, hidden accounts, all being mapped and connected by the program he and his father had created. But more importantly, it was identifying potential allies, people in positions of influence who might help them create real change. "So," Marcus said, looking at each person in the room, "are we ready to really change the world? Not just protect it from the worst abuses, but actually make it better?" The answer was written on every face. The bridge between worlds hadn't just been crossed, it had become a foundation for building something entirely new. And this time, they would build it together. 3 days after saving Victoria Chen's life, Marcus stood on the roof of Aurora Tower, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold. The same view that had once symbolized the barrier between his world and theirs now represented something different: possibility, change, and the power of crossing bridges instead of burning them. His shoulder still ached from the bullet wound, but it was a reminder of choices made and prices paid. Below, in the quantum computing lab, his father and a team of Aurora's best engineers were implementing the final safeguards for their AI system. The program that had started as a boy's dream of helping his community had evolved into something that could reshape the global financial landscape. "I thought I'd find you up here," Victoria said, stepping onto the roof. She carried 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Marcus. "Old habits die hard, always seeking higher ground?" Marcus smiled, accepting the coffee. It was from the same expensive cafe he used to pass every morning, smelling the aroma he could never afford. "Just thinking about everything that's changed. 3 days ago I was invisible. Now ... Now you're the boy who saved a billionaire's wife and exposed a global conspiracy," Victoria finished. "The media's having a field day with the story, though they don't know half of it." "And they never will," Alexander Chen said, joining them. He looked tired, but satisfied. "The official story stays simple. A brave young man saved my wife from terrorists, and in gratitude, we're launching a multi-billion-dollar community development initiative." Marcus nodded. They had agreed to keep the deeper truth hidden: the AI's full capabilities, the extent of the conspiracy, the ongoing mission to reform the system from within. Some battles were better fought in the shadows. The roof access door opened again, admitting James and May. Marcus's heart still skipped whenever he saw his father, still adjusting to the miracle of his return. May carried a familiar paper bag, and the smell made Marcus's eyes water. "Is that a burger?" May said, smiling. "Your father told me it was the one thing you always wanted but never got. Seemed fitting for today." Marcus took the bag with trembling hands. Inside was a perfectly made burger from the diner he used to pass every day, dreaming of how it would taste. But before he could take a bite, one more person joined their rooftop gathering. Michael Thompson, now officially revealed as the FBI agent who had spent 8 years building the case against Wallace's organization, emerged from the stairwell. He carried a thick envelope. "It's done," he said, handing the envelope to Marcus. "Everything's official. The Johnson Initiative has full federal backing and protection. Nobody can shut it down or interfere with its mission." Marcus opened the envelope, reviewing the documents inside. The $2 billion from the Chens had been matched by their promise, creating a $4 billion foundation dedicated to economic justice. But more importantly, the papers granted the initiative unprecedented autonomy and oversight powers. "The quantum computing division is secured too," Alexander added. "Your father will head the research team, with you as lead architect once you've completed your education. Full scholarships to any university you choose, of course." "And what about the neighborhood?" Marcus asked, thinking of Mr. Chen's store, of all the families struggling like his head. Victoria smiled. "Construction begins next week. New schools, medical facilities, housing developments. Everything we promised. But it's not just about building things. The initiative will create jobs, education programs, and real opportunities." "We're not just giving people fish," James said, quoting an old proverb. "We're teaching them to fish and making sure they have fair access to the lake." May wiped tears from her eyes, watching her son and his father standing together against the sunset. "James always said technology was like fire. It could warm a home or burn it down. Looks like you two finally figured out how to tend the flame." Marcus took a bite of his burger, letting the flavors fill his mouth. It was everything he'd dreamed of, but somehow the taste was secondary to the moment, sharing it with his family, whole and together again. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, his expression serious. "Wallace's network, and we've only scratched the surface. The AI is uncovering connections that go deeper than we imagined. This isn't over." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "It shouldn't be over. Real change takes time." He looked at his father. "And we've got time now." Victoria touched his arm gently. "You know, when you jumped through that elevator wall to save me, I thought you were just being heroically reckless. But you were actually making a choice to stop being invisible, to step into the light." "To build a bridge," Marcus added, thinking of how far he'd come from the boy who used to stare up at Aurora Tower, feeling like he could never cross the divide. The sun dipped below the horizon, but the city blazed with light, millions of windows glowing like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere in those lights were other kids like Marcus had been, dreaming of burgers they couldn't afford, carrying potential they couldn't realize. "To all of them," Marcus said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. The others joined him, their cups meeting as the last rays of sunlight caught the glass walls of Aurora Tower, transforming the entire building into a beacon of gold. 3 days ago, Marcus Johnson had been a shadow in the City of Lights. Now he stood at its peak, not just as the boy who saved a billionaire's wife, but as someone who had proved that the greatest heights could be reached by those who started at the bottom. The city stretched out before them, no longer divided into zones of light and shadow, but united in possibility. And somewhere in that urban tapestry, another young dreamer was looking up at the tower, seeing not a barrier, but a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Ready to change the world?" James asked his son. Marcus looked at his family, biological and chosen, and smiled. "Already started, Dad. Already started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."